Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. I'm sure we're all envisioning how we roughly expect Anthony Joshua vs Joseph Parker to play out in Cardiff come March 31st. Wrapped up in all of our thoughts and predictions is a healthy measure of expectation, and not only for the night, but what a win represents for their respective careers and ultimately their legacies. All these different views, they are now furiously bubbling up on the internet, television, newspapers, and conversations with friends, and in every comment section of every YouTube video on this fight. You've seen it, you've heard it, you've read it, and this in itself is shaping perceptions in the general narrative, which we then transfer to the fighters to deliver on. I've heard some say that the pressure is on one guy or the other, but for me, I believe it exists for both, and I firmly believe that. The weight of expectation for Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker, so yes, and Joseph Parker, it's massive. Literally millions of people and at least two nations are behind them. So let's start with the favourite Anthony Joshua. There's several things going on in the expectation and pressure department for him. Here we have a guy that's led an almost fairy tale sort of career so far. Late started to boxing, within 4 years wins Olympic gold, turns pro, races to 20-0 with 20 knockouts, many spectacular, winning 2 titles along the way and beating a future Hall of Famer Vladimir Klitschko. Mix in all of this with the stay humble attitude and it's kind of like a movie, a script of some sort. And the next act, it would appear to be March 31st, going for that third belt. It's easy to see why fans, broadcasters and sponsors have flocked to Anthony Joshua. He is the face of heavyweight boxing right now worldwide, and the biggest thing to happen to the division in the past 10 or 15 years. The actual hype around him, I haven't seen this for a number of years, but therein lies the rub. Because brand Anthony Joshua, it has evolved into this runaway force, the hype being so big now. I would venture to say that it's outstripping what Joshua will be able to continue doing at the elite level. What I mean by that is there is this huge expectation and almost a demand that every fight will end by knockout and in brutal fashion, which against the world's best will become increasingly harder and difficult to achieve. That's just a fact. We saw in the Takam fight actually how the premature stoppage, it led to boos in the large crowd, and Joshua was almost apologetic and quick to say that he was robbed of the opportunity to finish things the way he would have liked. Remember, every knockout, every spectacular finish, it's worth millions to Joshua, his sponsors, and everyone else with a finger in the pie. So there's very much a huge expectation to keep rolling in the manner that everyone is accustomed. I do wonder whether some of that will catch up with Joshua at some point, whether he'll be forced to gamble late in a fight to get the desired result. Until now, he's come up trumps, but the pressure to perform is massive. The pressure to keep brand Anthony Joshua rolling, it's immense. No matter how relaxed Anthony Joshua may seem, that pressure is always there. If he wants to become a billionaire like he says, then every knockout, every spectacular finish, it really does matter because it's worth a lot of money. And relatedly, we have to remember Anthony Joshua, he is still learning on the job. And it's sometimes taken for granted just how much he has achieved for someone still relatively early in their pro career. And he didn't have much of an amateur background either. And in just 20 pro fights, unified champion, and he's going for a third belt in his 21st fight. I mean, there's been much debate and consternation among fans about what he needs to do to improve the various elements of his game. You know, that's from the technical side to stamina to weight and so on. But there's always a risk with his limited amateur career and his relatively short pro career that he could have an off night. I mean, that does happen, where he could encounter something that gives him real trouble, that he can't call on the experience, because he hasn't had it to get himself out of it. Until now, he's made every post a winner, he's learned on the job, and he's managed to find a way to win after coming through adversity against the likes of, say, Vladimir Klitschko. But now to the public, it seems, it's almost a given that Joshua will overcome anyone and everyone, no matter his experience level. And another spoke adding to the expectation and pressure for Joshua is this goal of grabbing all 4 recognised heavyweight championship belts. He's halfway home right now and 2 wins away from stamping something very significant on the world of heavyweight boxing. It's hard enough winning 1 belt, let alone 4, and in the modern era it would be unmatched. And that's because the WBO was only recognised as a legitimate heavyweight strap in the 2000s. So the previous undisputed champ, Lennox Lewis, he had the 3 belts. And for undisputed overall, so the past 30 years there has only been 5 undisputed champions, and none in almost 18 years. That's a long time between drinks. So the equation for Joshua is simple. 2 fights, win those 2 fights, pick up 2 belts, and he creates history. Stamps his mark. A lot is at stake. It sounds easy, but it's not. The pressure and the expectation is there. It's huge. One other factor that I want to touch on, and it's all connected in some way to what I've already mentioned. Anthony Joshua, he's the favourite. He's expected to win by a majority of fans. The bookies would actually have you believe that Joshua is such a favourite that Joseph Parker most will not even bother showing up. This all adds to the pressure on Joshua to perform, to do what he says he wants to do to Parker, which is to hurt him and take his belt. Okay, so if we turn our attention to Joshua's rival on March 31st, Joseph Parker, I've seen a number of people say that because of some of the reasons that I've already outlined, that all the pressure is on Anthony Joshua, that Joseph Parker is under no pressure, that the bulk of expectation falls to the wildly popular Anthony Joshua, who seemingly on the surface has more to lose than Parker. And I disagree on that to a point. I think if we look at it objectively, many of the same pressures that exist for AJ exist for Parker, except that some of the drivers might be a little bit different. For example, Joseph Parker, he may be a world champion, but there is a cohort of fans who question his credentials, question the manner of his recent victories, and whether he really won a few close and competitive fights against the likes of Andy Ruiz Jr., Carlos Takam, and to some degree, Hughie Fury. There's a lingering doubt. Is this guy legit? So there is major pressure and expectation from Joseph Parker's fans in particular for him to deliver on the flashes of brilliance he has shown over the course of his career. And now that he's going to be weighing in a lower weight in which he has previously looked good at, there's almost an automatic expectation that coming in at the lower weight is going to translate into a better performance against Anthony Joshua. Nothing is ever a given. But Joseph Parker himself, he's spoken about needing to deliver the best performance of his career. He expects it of himself, and so does his trainer Kevin Barry. So there's a lot of external pressure, but also pressure from within, from Parker, from Barry, from the camp. They know that there's a lot on the line here. Adding to that, Parker will need to improve his performance and deliver in front of a crowd of about 80,000 people. It's a much bigger crowd that he's ever boxed in front of. And most of those fans, they won't be cheering for him. I mean, sure, there'll be some in there. I mean, in short, Parker, he's been exposed to boxing's hype and hoopla before, but never on this scale. So the challenge will be not only to box well, deliver the performance of his life, but to not get overawed by the occasion. Which, that does happen to fighters. We've seen it before. They sort of maybe wilt on the big stage or take a few rounds to warm up. And let's face it, there is no bigger stage than Cardiff on March 31st. It shapes as one of the biggest sporting events for boxing at least, and potentially worldwide, of this year. Okay, so while the hype train surrounding Joseph Parker, it has slowed some as he's faced stiffer competition, his career trajectory and place in the heavyweight division, it is totally on the line on March 31st. Win or lose, if he wins, he grabs a signature win to cement himself as a force in the heavyweight division. He gets a rematch with millions and he becomes a massive star. And no doubting he'd benefit from all the trappings that would come with that. But if he loses, there is the potential for him to sink into some obscurity relatively quickly. Unlike the massive paydays that a fight with Anthony Joshua would bring, belt or no belt, Parker doesn't have that same sort of commercial clout, and he could very well end up being a Luis Ortiz sort of character in the division, someone who's dangerous enough to be avoided by anyone with a chance at a title. So it could take him a good couple of years just to work his way back into position for another crack at another title. So it can be argued there's a huge amount on the line for Parker, and with that comes a large degree of pressure to really perform well. And like Joshua, Parker, he's also honing his craft on the fly. And, he became a world champion possibly earlier than many expected. And that was obviously through good management, taking up opportunities, and he kept winning. And we know Parker, he's got a number of things that he has to iron out. There's been things like head movement, being a bit upright, and defense. Those are things that have been talked about for some time now. And it's probably not realistic to expect all that to be fixed come fight night. But some of it has to be fixed. And there's almost an expectation that some of it, if it's not tightened up, it's going to be a hard night. So he really needs to have really done some hard yards, made the adjustments, or some adjustments at least, to really push Joshua, to put himself in a position to cause an upset. Which he can do. He's a live underdog in this one. And I think one more thing that I would add is, just like pressure being on Joshua as the favourite, pressure is on Parker being the underdog to perform. He's still got to perform well. There's probably a few other factors to throw into the mix of all this for both guys, but I wanted to give a snapshot of the pressures and expectations that both men are facing heading into what's hopefully a memorable night on March 31st. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.